Europe, 1914. A continent of dazzling innovation, artistic expression, and burgeoning prosperity. Yet beneath the veneer of progress, dangerous currents of ambition and fear churned relentlessly. This was a world teetering unknowingly on the precipice of an unimaginable catastrophe. For decades, the great powers had played a high-stakes game of imperial chess. Britain, France, and Germany aggressively competed for colonies, resources, and spheres of influence across the globe. Germany, a relatively young unified state, felt its place in the sun was denied. It sought to challenge Britain's naval supremacy and global empire. The peoples bound by language, culture, and history demanded their own nations, often at the expense of existing empires. The declining Ottoman Empire left a power vacuum, and newly independent states like Serbia harbored grand aspirations. Each promised mutual support in the event of an attack by one of the other great powers. This seemingly defensive pact created an automatic commitment. They dreamed of uniting all South Slavs under their banner. France sought security against Germany. Russia aimed to protect its Slavic brethren, and Britain worried about German naval expansion. Europe was now divided into two armed camps. His primary goal was to maintain the integrity of his diverse realm against the rising tides of nationalism. He was weary but steadfast. He felt a spiritual duty to protect Orthodox Slavs in the Balkans, a policy known as Pan-Slavism. Yet, his own country was ripe with social unrest and revolutionary fervor. Loyalty to one's nation became an almost religious fervor. Charismatic yet impulsive, he yearned for Germany to be a world power, but often alienated his neighbors with aggressive rhetoric and actions. Its leaders, like President Raymond, sought to rebuild French prestige and security. They saw Germany as an eternal threat. He believed Germany was encircled and needed to assert itself. Every distant territory claimed intensified the rivalries back home. The industrial might of nations fueled an insatiable hunger for raw materials and new markets. Vienna viewed Serbian nationalism as an existential threat to its fragile cohesion. Their fear was justified, as internal dissent was constant. This economic and imperial competition ignited a ferocious arms race. Originally conceived by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck to preserve peace, these agreements instead locked nations into a potentially disastrous domino effect. Factories across Europe churned out increasingly powerful weapons and warships. Military spending soared, creating vast standing armies ready for deployment. Hand in hand with imperial ambition rose the potent force of nationalism. In the Balkans, this fervent nationalism was particularly volatile. Serbia's ambitions directly threatened the ailing Austro-Hungarian Empire, a multi-ethnic patchwork ruled by the Habsburgs. This complex web of rivalries and aspirations was further complicated by an intricate system of alliances. The Triple Alliance, formed years earlier, bound Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy in a defensive pact. In response, France, Russia, and Great Britain gradually coalesced into the Triple Entente. The Kaiser of Germany, Wilhelm II, personified the nation's restless ambition. Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria-Hungary, a man of the old world, presided over a crumbling empire. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia ruled over a vast but deeply troubled empire. France, still bearing the scars of the Franco-Prussian War, harbored a deep desire for revenge and the return of Alsace-Lorraine. Great Britain, the world's preeminent naval and imperial power, primarily sought to maintain the balance of power on the continent. German naval expansion, however, increasingly threatened British dominance. London viewed German ambition with growing unease. It was steadily losing territory in the Balkans and North Africa. Its decline created a dangerous vacuum, drawing in the predatory interests of the great powers. Its nationalist fervor, fueled by secret societies like the Black Hand, was an open challenge to Austrian authority in the region. Annexations and wars in the preceding years had only heightened regional tensions. Each minor crisis brought Europe closer to the brink. Belgrade aimed to create a greater Serbia. The Ottoman Empire, once a mighty force, was now dubbed the sick man of Europe. Serbia, a small nation with a large heart, saw itself as the champion of all South Slavs, a territory it had administered since 1878. This act infuriated Serbia, which had its own claims to the region due to its large Serb population. The belief grew that a major European conflict was not a question of if, but when. Generals and politicians began to plan for the unthinkable. Germany's Schlieffen Plan, for instance, relied on a swift, decisive strike through neutral Belgium into France before Russia could fully mobilize. Speed was everything. The Moroccan crises of 1905 and 1911, involving Germany challenging French colonial claims, brought France and Germany to the brink of war. Holiday plans were made, crops were harvested, and the usual diplomatic squabbles occupied the newspapers. No one seriously anticipated the global conflagration that was mere weeks away. To Serbian nationalists, the Archduke's visit on this day was an insult, a blatant display of foreign domination. These incidents solidified the Entente. They were members of Mlada Bosna, a revolutionary group loosely connected to the Serbian secret society, the Black Hand. A bomb thrown by one of Princip's co-conspirators failed, merely injuring some bystanders, and the Archduke's adjutant, realizing the error, the car stopped and began to reverse. It was a moment of sheer, unbelievable coincidence. The motorcade sped off. Their goal, independence. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Habsburg throne, arrived in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. His visit was meant to inspect military maneuvers. Russia, backing Serbia, was humiliated when forced to back down. The Balkans, in particular, became a volatile powder keg, where local conflicts threatened to ignite a wider conflagration. He was consumed by radical nationalist ideals and a fervent desire to liberate his people from Austro-Hungarian rule. He carried a pistol and a small bomb. In 1908, Austria-Hungary formally annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina. This rising power was seen as an intolerable menace by the aging Austro-Hungarian Empire. This decision, driven by duty and perhaps a touch of Habsburg stubbornness, would prove fatal. Fate, it seemed, was conspiring. The first saw a coalition of Balkan states drive the Ottomans out of most of their European territories. The second saw former allies fighting over the spoils. Two Balkan wars erupted in 1912 and 1913, further destabilizing the region. Serbia emerged from these wars greatly enlarged and emboldened. Its military successes and territorial gains only amplified its nationalist aspirations. Diplomatic crises had become a regular feature of early 20th century European politics. Each crisis, though resolved, left behind a residue of suspicion and heightened animosity. Military strategists meticulously drafted war plans, often with rigid timetables. The summer of 1914 dawned, seemingly like any other. Then, on June 28, 1914, the spark was struck in a corner of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The date itself was provocative. Vidovdan, a highly significant Serbian national holiday commemorating a historical defeat by the Ottomans. Among the crowds lining Sarajevo's streets were a group of young Bosnian Serb conspirators. Gavrilo Princip, a slight, intense 19-year-old, was one of these conspirators. The Archduke's motorcade slowly made its way through the streets. Despite the clear danger, Franz Ferdinand insisted on visiting the hospital to check on the wounded. On the way to the hospital, the Archduke's driver made a wrong turn into a narrow street, and then history pivoted. Gavrilo Princip, having left the scene of the first attempt, happened to be standing mere feet away, buying a sandwich. He saw the Archduke's open car, stationary and vulnerable. He fired 2 shots at point-blank range into the vehicle. The second hit his wife, Sophie, in the abdomen. But within minutes, both were dead, their lives abruptly extinguished in a Sarajevo street. Such acts of political violence were not unheard of, but an heir to a major empire. This was different. Both were mortally wounded, bleeding profusely in the back of the car. The sound of the gunfire shattered the morning's uneasy calm. Seizing the astonishing opportunity, Princip drew his Browning pistol. The first bullet struck Archduke Franz Ferdinand in the jugular vein. People mourned, but diplomats assumed the crisis would be contained, like so many others before it. The summer holidays beckoned. It contained demands that effectively stripped Serbia of its sovereignty, including allowing Austrian officials to investigate on Serbian soil. Initial reports were chaotic and contradictory. The Archduke was still breathing, murmuring to Sophie. It balked, however, at the clause allowing Austrian investigation on its own territory, which it viewed as a violation of sovereignty. They miscalculated badly, underestimating Russia's commitment to Serbia and its own pan-Slavic ambitions. They saw an opportunity to crush Serbian nationalism once and for all. This was not just about the Archduke, it was about survival. News of the assassination rippled slowly across Europe, initially met with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Kaiser Wilhelm II and his government quickly offered their infamous blank check of unconditional support. Germany urged a swift, strong response. Few in the immediate aftermath believed this tragedy would plunge the continent into a full-scale war. The long-simmering resentment against Serbia boiled over. This was the justification Austria-Hungary had been waiting for. Yet, in Vienna, the assassination was seen as the ultimate insult and a direct challenge to the empire's very existence. Vienna quickly determined to punish Serbia decisively, regardless of the consequences. Crucially, Austria-Hungary sought reassurance from its powerful ally, Germany. Berlin hoped a quick, localized war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia would strengthen the Central Powers and deter Russia. With German backing, Vienna drafted a harsh ultimatum to Serbia on July 23, designed to be rejected. Serbia, facing overwhelming pressure, accepted almost all of the ultimatum's terms, surprising many European powers. This partial rejection was enough for Austria-Hungary, declaring Serbia's response unsatisfactory. Emperor Franz Joseph's government formally declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Shells soon began to fall on Belgrade. This was a complex, slow process, but it sent a clear signal to Germany and Austria-Hungary. Russia, seeing its Slavic ally under attack and recalling its humiliation in the Bosnian crisis, began to mobilize its vast army. Their strategy required immediate action to avoid a two-front war, forcing them to strike quickly in the west. German military leaders, committed to the rigid Schlieffen Plan, viewed Russian mobilization as an act of war. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. The dominoes were falling faster now. When the deadline passed, Britain declared war on Germany on August 4th. The alliance system, designed to prevent war, was now ensuring its rapid spread across the continent. This was not a direct response to a French act, but a preemptive strike dictated by the Schlieffen Plan. Germany had to eliminate France before tackling Russia. 2 days later, on August 3rd, Germany declared war on France. No one seemed able or willing to pull back from the abyss. The scale, the devastation, and the unprecedented loss of life were beyond comprehension for leaders and citizens alike. The initial shock of the Archduke's death had spiraled into a global confrontation. They were tragically mistaken. Europe would never be the same. The intricate web of alliances had drawn nation after nation into the conflict. The spark in Sarajevo, combined with the dry tinder of European politics, created a catastrophic inferno. The world stood on the precipice of an era-defining conflict, a war that would reshape maps, ideologies, and human history forever. This act, a violation of international law, immediately brought Great Britain into the fray. Young men eagerly volunteered, believing they would be home by Christmas. Propaganda painted the enemy as barbaric and the cause as righteous. To bypass formidable French border defenses, the Schlieffen Plan necessitated an invasion of neutral Belgium. Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality since 1839. Seeing German troops pour into Belgium, London issued an ultimatum to Berlin to withdraw. The great powers of Europe were now at war. What started as a local dispute in the Balkans had rapidly engulfed the continent. Initial public reaction in most capitals was a wave of patriotic fervor and enthusiasm. Few understood the true nature of the industrialized warfare that was about to unfold. Diplomats and politicians had lost control. The momentum of military plans and alliance obligations had taken over. The belief that this would be a short, decisive war proved to be a tragic delusion. The summer of 1914 saw a continent's worth of accumulated tensions, rivalries, and fears finally ignite. From the bustling streets of London to the imperial palaces of St. Petersburg, a generation prepared for what they thought would be a brief adventure. The old world was about to collapse, replaced by a new, brutal reality forged in the trenches and battlefields of total war. The gathering storm had broken.